Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1950s Contactee Movement. When Space Brothers brought a message of peace. While government intelligence agencies in the 1950s were busy panicking, launching Project Bluebird, and trying to reverse engineer crashed disks, a wildly different narrative was unfolding on the cultural fringe. While the military saw flying saucers as a terrifying national security threat, a generation of civilian contactees saw them as humanity's last best hope. The 1950s ET contactee movement offers a fascinating, surprisingly uplifting counterbalance to the cold paranoia of the Cold War. The cosmic messengers of the atomic age. During the peak of the 1950s flying saucer wave, a new archetype emerged. The ordinary human claiming direct, peaceful contact with benevolent extraterrestrials, often referred to as the Space Brothers. Unlike the terrifying clinical abductions popularized later in the 1970s and 1980s, 1950s contactees like George Adamski, Orfeo Angelucci, George Van Tassel, and Truman Bethurum painted a utopian picture of our cosmic neighbors. The message delivered by these visitors was remarkably consistent, urgent, and deeply philosophical. During the golden age of flying saucer culture in the 1950s, the narrative surrounding extraterrestrial life was not solely defined by military panic, covert CIA safehouses, or Cold War paranoia. Instead, a burgeoning grassroots movement led by civilian contactees introduced a deeply hopeful philosophical counter-narrative. Figures such as George Adamski, Orfeo Angelucci, George Van Tassel, and Truman Bethurum claimed face-to-face interactions with benevolent, highly evolved entities, frequently romanticized as space brothers hailing from our own solar system, such as Venus, Mars, or Saturn. The core tenets of the messages delivered by these extraterrestrial visitors offered a profound critique of mid-century human civilization, focusing on three foundational pillars. The primary catalyst for the Space Brothers' sudden appearance in Earth's skies was humanity's violent entry into the atomic age. Having successfully split the atom and detonated nuclear weapons at the close of World War II, humanity had crossed a dangerous technological threshold. The entities reportedly expressed grave, unyielding concern that an atomic-armed species was on the brink of self-annihilation. The core warning delivered to contactees was absolute. Humanity possesses the power to destroy its own world, but it will not be permitted to export that destruction into the wider galaxy. The visitors made it clear that interstellar space travel and atomic militarism are fundamentally incompatible. A civilization must outgrow its capacity for total planetary suicide before it can join the cosmic community. The Space Brothers frequently emphasize that material and technological advancement, when divorced from inner moral development, is a recipe for catastrophe. The entities pointed out that human science had far outpaced human ethics, granting caveman-level tribal aggression access to god-tier physical weaponry. To avert global disaster, humanity was urged to abandon war, dismantle geopolitical greed, and actively elevate its collective consciousness. The visitors stressed that survival depended on an internal, spiritual awakening, rather than a reliance on political treaties or military deterrence. Rejecting the predatory, conqueror tropes that would later dominate late-negative 20th century sci-fi cinema, 1950s contactees portrayed extraterrestrials as compassionate custodians. The visitors viewed humanity not as subjects to be conquered or enslaved, but as a troubled adolescent younger sibling struggling through a dangerous developmental phase. The message championed a profound sense of universal brotherhood, asserting that all sentient life in the universe shares a common spiritual origin. The visitors came not to dominate, but to remind humanity of its latent potential and divine interconnectedness. While skeptics and mainstream scientists dismissed the contactees as eccentric dreamers, this utopian philosophy struck a powerful chord with a public terrified by the looming shadow of the bomb. By reframing the unknown skies as a source of cosmic guidance rather than military dread, the 1950s contactee movement planted the early seeds for modern spiritual awakening and planetary peace activism. Though modern skeptics and even mainstream ufologists have historically rolled their eyes at the charismatic contactees, especially after George Adamski famously published accounts of writing in a sleek, cigar-shaped Venusian scout ship, and touring the dark side of the moon, the cultural legacy left behind by the 1950s contactee movement was far from trivial. Beneath the sensationalized book tours, desert lectures, and mid-century sci-fi aesthetics lay a profound social and spiritual undercurrent that permanently altered the American and global landscape. The movement generated two major cultural transformations. Long before the mass anti-war and counterculture movements of the late 1960s filled the streets, the contactee community quietly pioneered grassroots peace activism in the most unlikely of places: the scorching expanse of the Mojave Desert. Founded by former aircraft mechanic and contactee George Van Tassel, the annual giant rock spacecraft conventions held near Landers, California, became a massive cultural phenomenon. Beginning in the early 1950s, these gatherings drew thousands of everyday citizens, ranging from housewives and scientists to beatniks and philosophers, camping out under the desert stars. Far from being mere sci-fi fan clubs, these conventions served as early forums for intense anti-nuclear advocacy, global disarmament discussions, and early ecological awareness. Speakers and attendees argued that if humanity could embrace the Space Brothers' message of universal unity, we could dismantle the Cold War war machine. It was an unprecedented convergence of peace activism, wrapped in a cosmic cloak. The 1950s contact narrative fundamentally reshaped how Western society approached religion, metaphysics, and human potential, laying the direct bedrock for what would later blossom into the global New Age movement. The philosophies channeled by contactees synthesized ancient Eastern spiritual traditions such as karma, reincarnation, and non-duality with Western esoteric thought, alternative science, and a cosmic framework. God was no longer viewed merely as an anthropomorphic judge in the clouds, but as an infinite, universal consciousness connecting all living things across the stars. Unlike rigid dogmatic religions that demanded hierarchical control, the contactee message empowered the individual. It taught that anyone could achieve spiritual attunement through meditation, mental discipline, and a lifestyle of love and service. By shifting the focus from fear of the atomic bomb to hope for spiritual evolution, the contactees of the 1950s offered a generation a comforting psychological refuge. They transformed the cold, terrifying void of outer space into a classroom of higher learning, reminding humanity that the true journey of exploration was not just reaching outward to the stars, but evolving inward to save ourselves. It is one of history's great ironies. While the CIA's Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was spending millions in underground safe houses trying to chemically control human brains, ordinary people sitting in the California desert were listening to mental transmissions from Space Brothers, telling them to meditate, love one another, and throw away their bomb shelters. Whether those 1950s encounters were physical visits, lucid visions, or profound psychological coping mechanisms for an Adamic anxious society, their positive core message remains timeless. The stars weren't looking down at us with malice, they were waiting for us to grow up. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.